I was staring at the teacup in my trembling hands when I heard his voice behind me, smooth as silk and deadly as poison. "Drink up, darling. It'll help you sleep." That's when I knew. My husband, the man I'd loved with every fiber of my being, the man I'd trusted with my entire fortune and my shattered heart, was trying to kill me, and he'd already murdered my parents. If this story shocks you, if you want to know how I survived and got my revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I promise you won't believe where this goes. Drop a comment if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved. Now let me take you back to where it all began. It started at the Metropolitan Museum of Art on a crisp October evening 3 years ago, the kind of autumn night when New York feels like the center of the universe. The Great Hall was transformed into something out of a Gatsby fantasy, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across marble floors so polished they reflected the crowd like a mirror. Champagne flowed endlessly from silver fountains, and Manhattan's elite circulated through the galleries in their designer armor, each gown more extravagant than the last, each tuxedo more perfectly tailored. The air itself seemed to shimmer with wealth and power, and the unspoken competition that defined this world. My father, Harrison Vance, stood at the epicenter of it all like a king surveying his kingdom. At 62, he still commanded a room with the effortless authority of someone who'd spent 4 decades building one of the most powerful real estate empires in America. His silver hair was swept back impeccably, his custom Brioni tuxedo fit him like a second skin, and when he spoke, the entire crowd leaned in to listen. Tonight was his coronation, his moment of absolute triumph. He was unveiling plans for his magnum opus, a 100-story skyscraper that would pierce the Manhattan skyline and dwarf everything around it. The Vance Tower, they were calling it, a monument to ambition, to power, to legacy. I stood near the Egyptian wing, partially hidden behind a column topped with hieroglyphics that had survived millennia, clutching my third glass of Dom Perignon and wishing I could disappear into the ancient past with them. My emerald Valentino gown, custom-made in Milan at a cost that could have funded a small nonprofit for a year, felt like a beautiful cage. The silk clung to my body in all the right places, the color chosen specifically to complement my auburn hair and green eyes. I looked the part of Harrison Vance's daughter perfectly. That was the problem. I'd been playing this part my entire life, and I was suffocating in it. At 28, I should have been confident, established, making my own mark on the world. Instead, I felt like an ornament in my father's collection. I had a degree in architecture from Columbia, graduating summa cum laude. I had a portfolio bursting with innovative designs that incorporated sustainable materials, community spaces, and a philosophy that buildings should serve people, not just showcase wealth. I'd won awards in graduate school. Professors had called my work visionary, but none of that mattered in Harrison Vance's world. When he introduced me to investors, it was always my lovely daughter Ellie with a possessive hand on my shoulder. Never, my daughter the architect. My ideas were sweet or idealistic. My suggestions for company projects were smiled at and then ignored. The message was clear. I was meant to look beautiful, marry well, and eventually produce heirs. My actual talents were irrelevant. Every conversation that night felt like performance art. I smiled until my face hurt. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I nodded politely while men twice my age explained real estate and architecture to me, subjects I'd studied for years, as if I were a child. The golden cage was closing in tighter and tighter, and I could feel my dreams being crushed under the weight of expectations I'd never asked for. That's when Edward Blackwell cornered me near a display of Roman antiquities. At 73, he was one of my father's oldest business associates. A real estate magnate with a portfolio almost as impressive as my father's, and a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations. He also had wandering hands and a complete inability to understand the concept of personal space. I'd been avoiding him all evening, but he'd finally trapped me, positioning himself between me and the nearest exit. "Ellie, you look absolutely ravishing tonight," he said, his breath heavy with scotch. His hand found the small of my back, his fingers splaying across the exposed skin there. "Your father tells me you've been dabbling in architecture." "That's charming. My granddaughter went through an art phase too." Dabbling. As if my degree and years of study were a hobby, a phase I'd grow out of. I stepped away slightly, but he moved with me, his hand sliding lower. My skin crawled. I was calculating escape routes, wondering if causing a scene would be worth it, when a voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Mr. Blackwell, I apologize for the interruption, but Harrison needs to speak with you immediately about the Riverside project." There's been a development that requires your attention. The voice was smooth, cultured, with just enough authority to make it impossible to ignore. Blackwell's hand dropped from my back instantly, his businessman instincts overriding his predatory ones. Of course, Blackwell muttered, already turning away. We'll continue this conversation later, Ellie. Not if I could help it. I turned to face my rescuer, ready to express genuine gratitude, and found myself looking at Julian Croft, my father's chief operating officer. Though I'd barely registered his existence in the 6 months since he'd been hired. I'd seen him in passing at family dinners, at company events, but we'd never really spoken. He was always in the background, efficient and competent, but somehow unremarkable in a world of larger-than-life personalities. Except now, up close, I realized he wasn't unremarkable at all. He was just different. Where the other men in this room wore their power like peacock feathers, all flash and display, Julian had a quieter presence. His tuxedo was Tom Ford, perfectly tailored but understated. His dark hair had a slight wave to it that looked natural rather than styled to within an inch of its life like every other man here. But it was his eyes that caught me, a striking gray blue that reminded me of storm clouds over the ocean. They held genuine warmth, real humor, instead of the calculating coldness or barely disguised lechery I was used to seeing. Thank you, I managed, still slightly off balance from the interaction with Blackwell. Seriously. I was about 2 seconds away from dumping this entire glass of champagne on his Ferragamos and letting him explain the stain to his wife. Julian's laugh was unexpected, rich and genuine, reaching all the way to those remarkable eyes. That would have been entertaining to watch, though probably catastrophic for Vance Enterprises' relationship with Blackwell Holdings. Your father's been courting him for that Atlantic City development for months. He extended his hand, and I noticed his cufflinks, simple platinum rather than the flashy gold most men here wore. Julian Croft, I know we've met briefly before, but never properly. I'm sorry about that. I should have made more of an effort. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, warm but not presumptuous. When I looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time, I felt something shift in my chest. A spark of interest, of curiosity, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I know who you are, I said, surprised by how genuine my smile felt. My father speaks very highly of you. It's all Julian did this, and Julian's strategy that every morning at breakfast. You've apparently revolutionized our acquisition process and saved us millions. I couldn't quite keep the bitterness out of my voice. My father had time to praise Julian's business acumen at length, but couldn't spare 5 minutes to discuss my designs. If Julian noticed the edge in my tone, he didn't react to it. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice so our conversation became intimate, private despite the crowd swirling around us. I saw your designs, the ones for the Community Arts Center in Brooklyn. My breath caught. What? They were in a folder on your father's desk a few weeks ago. I know I probably shouldn't have looked. It wasn't professional, but the cover rendering caught my eye and I couldn't help myself. He paused, and there was something in his expression, an intensity that made my pulse quicken. They were extraordinary, Ellie, truly extraordinary. The way you integrated sustainable materials with classical architectural elements, the natural light mapping through the seasons, the flow of community spaces into exhibition areas. That's not just architecture. That's art with a social conscience. That's building with a soul. I literally felt the air leave my lungs. No one in my father's world had ever talked to me about my work like this. They asked about my dating life, my social calendar, whether I'd met any suitable young men. They commented on my appearance, my dress, my hair. But my designs, my actual work, that might as well not exist. And here was this man, this stranger I'd barely noticed, telling me he'd not only looked at my work but actually understood it. You really looked at them? My voice came out smaller than I intended, vulnerable. Not just flipped through to be polite. I spent 20 minutes studying them, Julian said, and the sincerity in his voice made something crack open in my chest. The Brooklyn project, especially. The way you designed the community spaces to flow seamlessly into the exhibition areas, creating this organic integration of everyday life and high art. It reminded me of Alvar Aalto's work in Finland, that humanistic approach to modernism, but more dynamic, more alive, more hopeful. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with those storm cloud eyes. You believe buildings can change lives, don't you? That architecture is about more than ego and aesthetics. You think it's about creating spaces where people can become their best selves. I couldn't speak. Tears were actually burning behind my eyes. This stranger had seen into my soul with one conversation, had understood the philosophy I'd been developing for years, the vision that my own father dismissed as idealistic nonsense. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Julian smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. I thought so. I could see it in every line of your drawings. That's rare, Ellie. Most architects in our world build monuments to wealth. You want to build monuments to possibility. We talked for over an hour that night, standing in that alcove near the Egyptian wing while the gala swirled around us like a distant dream. Julian didn't mention stock prices or profit margins or any of the business talk that usually dominated these events. Instead, we dove deep into architecture, art, philosophy, the intersection of form and function, and social responsibility. He'd traveled extensively, spending 6 months in Barcelona studying Gaudi's organic approach to architecture, 3 months in Japan learning about wabi-sabi and the beauty of imperfection, a time in Copenhagen exploring sustainable urban design and human-centered city planning. When he described watching the sunset reflect off Zaha Hadid's Haydar Aliyev Center in Baku, the way the building seemed to ripple and flow like fabric frozen in motion, his entire being came alive. His hands moved as he talked, sculpting shapes in the air. His eyes lit up with genuine passion. This wasn't someone making conversation or trying to impress me. This was someone sharing something he truly loved with someone he thought might understand. And I did understand. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Not as Harrison Vance's daughter, not as a pretty socialite with an expensive education, not as a pawn in my father's empire building, but as Ellie, just Ellie, the woman who dreamed in blueprints and believed that buildings could change lives, that spaces could heal trauma, that architecture was a form of love letter to humanity. When my father finally found us, well past midnight, we were still talking, having moved through discussions of brutalism and the Bauhaus movement to debate the ethics of gentrification and the architect's responsibility to community. My father looked surprised, then pleased in a way that should have been my first warning. "Julian, I see you've been keeping my daughter entertained," Harrison said, his hand landing on my shoulder with that familiar possessive weight. "I hope she hasn't been boring you with her little projects." Little projects, my life's work, dismissed in 2 words. I felt myself shrinking, retreating back into the role of dutiful daughter, but Julian did something unexpected. He straightened, met my father's eyes directly, and said with quiet firmness, "Actually, Harrison, Ellie and I have been having a fascinating discussion about sustainable urban development and community-centered architecture. Her work is remarkable. You should be very proud." My father blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "Well, yes, of course I'm proud. That's my girl." But there was something calculating in his eyes now, a look I recognized. He was reassessing, recalculating, seeing Julian's interest in me and already plotting how to use it. After that night, Julian found reasons to come by the family estate in the Upper East Side with increasing frequency. At first, it was business with my father, late-night strategy sessions in the study, discussions of acquisitions and market trends. But then he'd linger afterward, finding me in the library or the sunroom or the rooftop garden where I liked to sketch. He'd ask about whatever I was working on, and actually listen to my answers. Really listen, asking follow-up questions that showed he'd been paying attention, offering insights that demonstrated he understood not just what I was doing but why. He started bringing me books. Not flowers or jewelry or the typical courtship gifts of our social set, but books. A first edition of Le Corbusier's Towards a New Architecture, because I'd mentioned loving brutalist design in one of our conversations. A beautifully illustrated volume on Japanese tea houses and the principles of negative space as an active design element. Monographs on emerging architects from Seoul, Sao Paulo, Lagos, places where exciting, innovative work was happening outside the traditional Western canon. He'd send me links at odd hours, emails with subject lines like, "Thought you'd find this interesting," containing articles about radical housing projects in Singapore or sustainable materials being developed in Sweden. Sometimes he'd include a brief note. "This made me think of your Brooklyn project," or "reminds me of what you were saying about buildings as community catalysts." These small gestures meant more to me than all the expensive gifts I'd ever received. They meant he'd been thinking about me, about my work, about my ideas. My father approved of Julian's attention to me, which in retrospect should have been my first and loudest warning. Harrison Vance didn't approve of anything unless it served his interests. "Julian's a good man," he'd say over breakfast, not looking up from the Wall Street Journal. "Brilliant mind for business. came from nothing and built himself up through sheer determination and intelligence. That's the kind of man I respect. That's the kind of man who understands what it takes to build and maintain an empire. What my father really meant was that Julian was useful. That Julian's growing attachment to me made him even more invested in Vance Enterprises' success. That Julian was the kind of man who could be controlled through his connection to me. My father was already planning it, already seeing how he could bind Julian to the company permanently through marriage to his daughter. But I didn't see any of that. I was blinded by something I'd been starving for: genuine attention, real understanding, the feeling that someone saw me as a whole person rather than a decorative asset or a disappointing daughter. I saw a man who listened when I talked, who remembered details I mentioned in passing, who made me feel like my thoughts and dreams and ambitions mattered beyond my last name and trust fund. When Julian took me to a tiny ramen shop in the East Village for our first official date instead of Le Bernardin or 11 Madison Park or any of the other Michelin-starred temples where people in our world performed courtship rituals, I thought it showed he wasn't impressed by wealth and status. The place had only 12 seats at a cramped counter. The steam from the broth fogged up the windows, and it was perfect. We sat side by side on wobbly stools, slurping noodles and talking about childhood dreams and adult compromises, and I fell a little bit in love with him right there. When he spent an entire Saturday helping me scout potential sites for a community center, I was designing pro bono in the Bronx, walking through neighborhoods my father would never deign to visit, taking notes on my observations and suggesting angles I hadn't considered. I thought it showed he cared about my dreams. We got caught in a sudden rainstorm and ended up soaked and laughing, sharing a too-small umbrella we'd bought from a street vendor, and I fell a little more when he stood up to my father at a family dinner, defending my proposal for a sustainable housing project that Harrison had dismissed as idealistic nonsense that will never generate appropriate returns. I thought I'd found someone who truly understood me. My father had been in full dismissive mode, explaining to the assembled guests, his usual captive audience of business associates and social climbers, why my ideas were naive, why profit margins had to be the primary consideration, why I didn't understand the real world. I'd felt myself shrinking in my chair, that familiar shame burning through me. Then Julian had set down his wine glass with a soft clink that somehow commanded attention. With respect, Harrison, I disagree. Ellie's proposal isn't idealistic. It's forward-thinking. The market is shifting. Younger buyers, millennials and Gen Z, they prioritize sustainability and community impact. A project like what Ellie's suggesting could be both profitable and socially responsible. It could also generate significant positive publicity for Vance Enterprises, position us as innovators rather than just developers. I'd be happy to run some financial projections if you'd like to see the numbers. The table had gone silent. No one contradicted Harrison Vance in his own home, but Julian had done it calmly, rationally, framing it as a business decision rather than a moral one. And I'd watched my father's face go through several expressions before settling on thoughtful consideration. Perhaps there's merit to exploring the numbers, Harrison had finally said, which was as close to agreement as he ever got when someone challenged him. Under the table, Julian had found my hand and squeezed it gently. That's when I fell completely. 6 months after that first night at the gala, Julian proposed. We were in Riverside Park at sunset, the Hudson River reflecting gold and amber, and he got down on one knee with a vintage Art Deco ring that he'd spent weeks searching for because he knew I loved the 1920 seconds design aesthetic. Ellie, you've shown me what it means to dream bigger, to see beauty in the everyday, to believe that what we build can make the world better. Will you marry me? I said yes, without hesitation. I was deliriously, completely, foolishly in love. My father, surprisingly, was thrilled. The engagement party he threw at the plaza was more lavish than some weddings. But then came the part that, in retrospect, should have shattered all my illusions. A week before the wedding, my father called Julian into his study. I was passing by and heard my father's stern voice through the heavy oak door. Before we proceed, there's the matter of the prenuptial agreement. My father's tone was all business. I pressed closer to the door, my heart sinking. I knew this would humiliate Julian, would make him feel like we didn't trust him, like his love could be bought or sold. I heard papers rustling. Then, my father continued, his voice harder. This document is very clear. In the event of divorce, you receive nothing from the Vance estate or Vance Enterprises. No property, no shares, no severance beyond your contractual employment terms. My daughter's inheritance and the family company remain entirely protected. There was a long pause. I held my breath, waiting for Julian's reaction, prepared to storm in and defend him, to tell my father this was unnecessary and insulting. Then Julian spoke, his voice steady and clear. "Where do I sign?" "You don't want your attorney to review it first?" My father sounded almost surprised. "Harrison, I'm not marrying Ellie for money or power or business connections. I'm marrying her because I love her. Because she sees the world in ways that make me want to be better. Because when I'm with her, I feel like I've finally found home." Julian's voice was emotional, raw with sincerity. "You can put whatever terms you want in that document. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if Ellie and I are together, it'll be because we choose each other every single day, not because of what we legally owe each other." I heard the scratch of pen on paper. Then Julian added, "I grew up with nothing, Harrison. I built everything I have through work and determination. I don't need the Vance fortune. I just need your daughter." I stood outside that door with tears streaming down my face, falling even more deeply in love with the man who just proved that he wanted me, not my money or my name. When Julian emerged, he found me there and pulled me into his arms, kissing the tears from my cheeks. "You heard?" he asked softly. "I heard," I whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Ellie, more than I can ever express." 3 weeks later, we were married in a ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral. It was everything I dreamed of: intimate, elegant, filled with genuine joy instead of social obligation. Julian's vows made me cry. He promised to support my dreams, to challenge me to be my best self, to build a life together that was about more than wealth or status or legacy. He promised to be my partner in every sense of the word. Our honeymoon was supposed to be 3 weeks in Italy, touring architectural marvels from Rome to Venice. We'd planned to spend hours in museums, sketch together in piazzas, make love in ancient cities under starlit skies. But we only made it through the first week. The call came at 2 a.m. Italian time. I was sleeping peacefully, dreaming of the Pantheon we'd visited that day, when Julian's phone rang. He answered it immediately, his voice alert despite the hour. I saw his face change, saw the color drain from his features. "What is it?" I asked, suddenly terrified. Julian turned to me, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes. A perfect mixture of shock and grief that seemed so genuine, so real. "Ellie, sweetheart, you need to sit down. There's been an accident." My parents had been driving to their cabin in the Catskills, a weekend getaway they took several times a year. It was a route they knew by heart, a winding mountain road they'd driven hundreds of times. According to the state police, the brakes on their Range Rover had failed on a steep descent. The vehicle had gone through a guardrail and plunged 200 feet into a ravine. They'd both died on impact. The next weeks were a blur of black clothing, funeral arrangements, sympathetic faces, and overwhelming grief. I was 29 years old and suddenly an orphan. The foundation of my entire world had crumbled. Harrison Vance, the man who'd shaped every aspect of my life, who I'd struggled against and loved fiercely, was gone. My mother, who'd been the gentle counterbalance to my father's intensity, who'd encouraged my architectural dreams even when my father dismissed them, was gone too. Julian became everything to me in those dark days. He handled all the logistics I couldn't face. He dealt with the police investigation, which concluded the crash was a tragic accident caused by mechanical failure. He managed the media circus that erupted when one of New York's most prominent businessmen died in such dramatic fashion. He coordinated with the company's board of directors, stepping up to keep Vance Enterprises stable while I fell apart. At the funeral, with what seemed like half of Manhattan in attendance, Julian stood beside me as I delivered a eulogy I could barely get through. When my voice broke, when I couldn't continue, he gently took my hand and squeezed it, lending me his strength. That night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, haunted by images of my parents' final moments, he held me and let me cry until I had nothing left. "I'm here," he whispered into my hair. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this together." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. The reading of the will happened 2 weeks after the funeral. My father had structured everything meticulously, as he structured everything in life. I inherited the majority of the Vance estate, including our family properties, my mother's art collection, and a trust fund worth hundreds of millions. But the company itself, Vance Enterprises, was more complicated. My father had wanted to ensure it remained stable and professionally managed. I was given 51% ownership, maintaining family control, but the board had significant operational authority, and my father had named Julian as interim CEO, with the expectation that he'd guide the company until I was ready to take over. At the time, I was grateful. I couldn't imagine trying to run a billion-dollar real estate empire while drowning in grief. Julian seemed like the perfect solution. Someone my father had trusted, someone who knew the business inside and out, someone who loved me and would protect my interests. The first few months seemed to confirm that trust. Julian worked 18-hour days, meeting with investors, overseeing projects, maintaining the Vance reputation. The board praised his leadership. Stock prices remained stable. Major deals continued to close. From the outside, it looked like Vance Enterprises was in capable hands, but slowly, things began to change. It started with small things I barely noticed in my grief fog. The longtime executive assistant my father had employed for 15 years was suddenly replaced. Margaret wanted to retire. Julian explained, the stress of Harrison's death was too much for her. I found someone younger, more tech-savvy. The new assistant, a cold woman named Veronica, seemed to have little loyalty to the Vance family legacy. Then the head of security, a man named Marcus Thorne who'd protected my father for over a decade, was quietly let go. "We're restructuring the security department," Julian said when I asked about it, "bringing in a more modern approach, better suited to current threats." Marcus was replaced with Julian's own pick, someone with no connection to my family. "Board meetings happened without me. You're still grieving," Julian would say, kissing my forehead. "Let me handle the business stress. You focus on healing." It sounded loving, protective. I didn't recognize it as isolation. My best friend Chloe was the first to voice concerns. We'd been close since college, when we'd bonded over late-night design studios and dreams of changing the world through architecture. She'd stood by my side through everything: my struggles with my father, my whirlwind romance with Julian, the devastating loss of my parents. But 6 months after the funeral, over dinner, at a quiet Italian restaurant in Soho, she confronted me. "Ellie, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear me." Chloe's dark eyes were serious, worried. "I'm concerned about Julian." I immediately went defensive. "What do you mean? He's been amazing. I couldn't have survived these months without him." "That's exactly what worries me." Chloe leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Think about it, Elle. How quickly did he come into your life? How perfectly did everything align? And now your parents are dead and he's running the entire company? Are you suggesting Julian had something to do with my parents' accident?" My voice rose sharply. Several nearby diners glanced our way. "That's insane, Chloe. That's conspiracy theory nonsense. The police investigated. It was mechanical failure." "I'm not saying he caused the accident," Chloe backpedaled slightly. "I'm just saying the timing is suspicious. And the way he's systematically replacing everyone loyal to your family, the way he's keeping you away from the business, the way he controls every aspect of your life now, it's not healthy." "He's protecting me," I insisted. "He's trying to make my life easier while I grieve. Or he's trying to make sure you don't see what he's really doing." Chloe reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, just consider the possibility. Get a lawyer. Have someone independent review what's happening at Vance Enterprises, for your own protection." "I can't believe you're doing this." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "My parents just died, Chloe. I'm trying to survive each day. And you're here making up theories about how my husband, the man who's been my rock through all of this, is somehow the villain? Maybe you're just jealous that I have someone and you don't. Maybe you can't stand that I'm not available to drop everything for you anymore." Chloe's face went pale. "Ellie, that's not fair. That's not what this is about." "I think I need some space from you," I said coldly. "I need people in my life who support me and Julian, not people who try to tear us apart with paranoid fantasies." I left the restaurant without looking back. I told Julian about the conversation that night, expecting him to be hurt or angry. Instead, he was calm, almost philosophical. "Chloe cares about you," he said, pulling me into his arms on our living room couch. "In her own misguided way, she's trying to protect you. She doesn't know me like you do. She doesn't understand our relationship. Give her time. She'll come around." His reasonableness made me feel even more justified in my anger at Chloe. See? Even Julian wasn't upset. I was the one overreacting. I was the one pushing away a friend who was just concerned. Except Chloe wasn't wrong. She was seeing what I couldn't, that Julian was slowly, methodically cutting me off from everyone who might question him. 2 months later, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I was doing laundry, a mundane task that felt grounding in its normalcy, when I found a diamond earring in the pocket of Julian's overcoat. It wasn't mine. I didn't wear that style, and the diamonds were of a quality I'd recognize. Someone else's jewelry in my husband's pocket. My hands shook as I held it. There had to be an explanation. Maybe a client had dropped it and Julian had found it. Maybe it belonged to someone at the office and he'd been asked to get it cleaned. There was a reasonable explanation. There had to be. That evening, I waited until Julian came home from work. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. When he leaned in to kiss me, I stepped back. "I found this in your coat." I held out the earring. "Want to tell me whose it is?" Julian's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like anger. "You went through my pockets?" "I was doing laundry, Julian. I wasn't snooping. I found this by accident." I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. "Now answer the question. Whose earring is this?" "I don't know." He shrugged, but there was tension in his shoulders. "Probably someone at the office. You know how many people I meet with every day? Someone could have dropped it in my car, or it could have been at a restaurant and I picked it up. Why does this matter?" "It matters because I found another woman's jewelry in your possession, and you're acting like it's nothing." "Because it is nothing." Julian's voice rose, which shocked me. In all the time I'd known him, through the stress of my parents' deaths and the pressure of running the company, I'd never heard him raise his voice. "What matters is that you don't trust me. What matters is that you're going through my things, questioning me like I'm some kind of criminal. I've done everything for you, Ellie. I've put my life on hold to take care of you, to run your father's company, to make sure you're okay. And this is the thanks I get? Accusations and suspicion?" I felt myself wilting under his anger. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Chloe's words had poisoned my mind. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say, even though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just with everything that's happened, I'm not thinking clearly." Julian's expression softened immediately. He came to me, cupped my face in his hands. "I know, baby. I know you're still hurting. The grief makes you see threats where there aren't any. But you have to trust me. I would never, ever hurt you. You're everything to me." He kissed me tenderly, and I let myself believe him. I let myself fall back into the comfort of his arms, ignoring the small voice in my head that whispered something was very, very wrong. But that voice got louder. Julian started coming home later and later. Business dinners that stretched past midnight, weekend meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. And when he was home, he was distant, always on his phone, taking calls in another room with his voice dropping to a whisper. When I asked about it, he'd say it was confidential business matters, nothing I needed to worry about. The intimacy between us began to fade. We hadn't made love in weeks. When I tried to initiate, Julian would claim exhaustion or stress. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's just been such a long day. Can we do this another time?" Another time never seemed to come. I started having trouble sleeping. The grief that I'd been pushing down came roaring back, mixed with anxiety and a gnawing sense that my life was spinning out of control. Julian noticed, of course. He was always watching me with those concerned gray-blue eyes. "You need to rest," he'd say. "You're not sleeping well. It's affecting your health." He started bringing me tea before bed. "Chamomile with honey," he said. "It would help me relax, help me sleep." And it did. I'd drink the tea, and within 30 minutes, I'd feel drowsy, heavy-limbed. I'd sleep deeply, dreamlessly, and wake feeling groggy and disoriented. After 2 weeks of this routine, Chloe called me. We hadn't spoken since our fight at the restaurant, and hearing her voice brought a rush of complicated emotions. "Ellie, I need to apologize," she said immediately. "I was out of line at dinner. Your marriage is your business, and I had no right to interfere. Can we meet? Can we try to fix this?" I wanted to say no, to protect myself from more of her suspicions and warnings, but I missed her. She'd been my best friend for over a decade, and the loneliness I'd been feeling was overwhelming. "Okay," I agreed. "Coffee tomorrow?" We met at a small cafe in Greenwich Village, far from the circles where anyone would recognize us. Chloe looked thinner, worried. The moment I sat down, she grabbed my hands. "I'm sorry," she said again, "but I'm not sorry for caring about you or being concerned. Ellie, you look exhausted. Are you okay?" I wanted to lie, to maintain the facade that everything was fine, but looking into Chloe's eyes, I couldn't. "I don't know." I admitted quietly. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I can't sleep, I can't focus, and Julian has been so distant lately. Maybe you were right to be concerned. Chloe's expression tightened. About what specifically? I told her about the earring, about Julian's anger, about how he was gone all the time now, about how isolated I felt, how the tea he gave me made me sleep so heavily that I woke feeling drugged. As I talked, I watched Chloe's face grow more and more alarmed. Ellie, listen to me very carefully. Chloe's voice was low, urgent. You need to be careful. You need to protect yourself. Do you remember Marcus Thorne, your dad's head of security? Julian let him go months ago. Julian didn't let him go. Marcus resigned because he was uncomfortable with changes Julian was making, and Marcus still has contacts, still hears things. He called me 3 weeks ago because he couldn't reach you. He said Julian has been systematically replacing everyone at Vance Enterprises with his own people. People with questionable backgrounds, people who owe him favors. Marcus thinks something is very wrong. My stomach dropped. Why would Marcus call you instead of me? Because he tried to call you 17 times, Ellie. You never answered or called back. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my call log. There were no missed calls from Marcus. None. But I had a vague memory of Julian mentioning that Marcus had tried to contact me, that he was just bitter about being let go and I shouldn't engage with him. Julian told me Marcus called once, and that he was just trying to cause trouble. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Julian is lying to you. Chloe squeezed my hands tighter. And if he's lying about this, what else is he lying about? Ellie, I think you need to talk to Marcus. I think you need to find out what's really going on at your company. And I think you need to stop drinking anything Julian gives you. Every instinct in me wanted to defend Julian, to explain away these concerns. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Can you get me Marcus's number? Chloe pulled a business card from her purse. She'd been carrying it with her, hoping for this moment. He's expecting your call. He wants to help you, Ellie. He loved your father, and he's worried about you. I took the card with shaking hands. That night, after Julian had gone to bed, I locked myself in my closet and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. Miss Vance. His gruff, familiar voice brought tears to my eyes. Marcus had been a fixture in my life since I was 18, a steady, protective presence. I was hoping you'd call. Marcus, what's going on? Chloe said you have concerns about Julian. More than concerns, Miss Vance. I have evidence of serious financial irregularities at Vance Enterprises. Money being moved into offshore accounts, contracts being awarded to shell companies, and all of it traces back to Julian. But that's not even the worst part. What could be worse than embezzlement? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't believe your parents' accident was an accident. I think the brakes were sabotaged. And I think Julian knows something about it. The world tilted. I pressed my hand against the closet wall to steady myself. That's impossible. The police investigated. They said it was mechanical failure. The police investigation was cursory at best. They saw a tragic accident and closed the case quickly. But I've been doing my own investigation, quietly. The mechanic who last serviced your parents' vehicle disappeared 2 weeks after the accident. I finally tracked him down in Florida. He's willing to talk, for a price. He says someone paid him to file a false maintenance report to make it look like the brakes were fine when they weren't. Did he say who paid him? He never met the person directly. It was all done through intermediaries. But he remembered one detail. The person who contacted him had a distinctive accent, a slight British inflection mixed with American. And he mentioned the name of an Italian restaurant in Little Italy as the meeting location. Piccola Cucina. Does that mean anything to you? My blood went cold. Julian had a slight British accent from spending his childhood in London before moving to the States. And Piccola Cucina was his favorite restaurant, the place he'd taken me on our third date. Yes, I whispered. It means something. Miss Vance, I need you to be very careful. If Julian suspects that you're investigating him, you could be in danger. Real danger. I think you need to meet with me. I have evidence I can show you, and I can help you gather more. But we need to be smart about this. We arranged to meet 2 days later at his office in Brooklyn, a small security consulting firm he'd started after leaving Vance Enterprises. I told Julian I was meeting with a grief counselor, which was plausible enough that he didn't question it. Marcus's office was small but professional, with security cameras and locks that would make Fort Knox jealous. He had files spread across his desk, and his expression when he saw me was grim. Miss Vance, What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult. Are you prepared? I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I was prepared for anything anymore. Marcus opened a file and pulled out a series of photographs. They showed Julian with a woman I didn't recognize. A striking woman with long dark hair and classic Italian features. They were clearly intimate, the photos showing them holding hands, kissing, entering what looked like a luxury apartment building together. Who is she? My voice was surprisingly steady given that my world was shattering. Her name is Isabella Rossi. She's a financial consultant based in Manhattan, but she travels frequently to Italy. And here's where it gets interesting. Marcus pulled out another document. Isabella's father was Antonio Rossi, a real estate developer in Italy who tried to expand into the US. Market about 8 years ago. He wanted to partner with Vance Enterprises on a major project in Manhattan. Your father investigated Antonio's background and discovered connections to organized crime, specifically money laundering operations. Harrison refused the partnership and went further, providing evidence to federal authorities. Antonio was arrested, his company collapsed, and he died in prison 3 years ago from a heart attack. The pieces were starting to come together in a horrible picture. Isabella wanted revenge. More than that, she wanted to destroy everything Harrison built and take it for herself. I believe she recruited Julian specifically for this purpose. My investigation shows that Julian and Isabella have known each other for at least 6 years. They met in London, where Julian was supposedly building his career in finance. But his resume has gaps, inconsistencies. I don't think Julian Croft is even his real name. 6 years. That meant they'd known each other long before Julian ever started working for my father. Long before he'd swept me off my feet at that gala. Every moment of our relationship had been a calculated lie. I think I'm going to be sick, I managed, and Marcus quickly guided me to a chair, getting me water. I'm sorry, Miss Vance. I know this is devastating, but you need to know the truth so you can protect yourself. You said you think my parents' deaths weren't an accident. Do you have proof? Not yet, but I'm working on it. The mechanic is willing to testify, but we need more. We need to catch Julian in the act of something concrete. And there's something else. Marcus pulled out a small device, no bigger than a pen. This is a recording device, military grade, completely undetectable. I need you to plant it in Julian's car and in his home office. It's risky, but if he's planning anything else, we'll hear it. I stared at the device. If I did this, there was no going back. If Julian found out, if I was wrong about all of this, my marriage would be over. But if I was right, my life might be over if I didn't act. Show me how it works, I said. Marcus spent the next hour teaching me how to use the recording device, how to hide it, how to retrieve the recordings remotely. We practiced until I could do it smoothly, naturally. Then he gave me a prepaid phone with his number programmed in. Use only this phone to contact me. I'm assuming Julian monitors your regular phone. And Miss Vance? Trust no one at Vance Enterprises right now. Julian has plants everywhere. Your safest bet is to act normal. Don't let him suspect anything has changed. That night, my hands shook as I placed the recording device in Julian's BMW, hiding it in a small gap beneath the driver's seat. When I heard his key in the door, I was on the couch with a book, looking as casual as possible. How was your day? Julian asked, leaning down to kiss my cheek. He smelled like expensive cologne and something else, a perfume I didn't recognize. Good. My session with the counselor was helpful. She thinks I'm making progress. The lie came easily, which frightened me. When had I become someone who could lie so smoothly? I'm glad, sweetheart. You deserve to heal. Julian's smile was warm, loving. Looking at him now, knowing what I knew, I could see the calculation behind those eyes. How had I ever thought it was genuine? The next morning, after Julian left for work, I placed the second device in his home office, tucked behind a row of books on the built-in shelves. Then I went about my day as normally as possible, all while my heart raced with anxiety and dread. That evening, Julian came home with a cup from my favorite tea shop. I picked this up for you. That chamomile blend you love. Thought it might help you sleep again. I took the cup with a smile, thanking him. But as soon as he turned away to change out of his work clothes, I went to the kitchen and poured the entire thing down the sink, rinsing the cup thoroughly. Then I filled it with plain chamomile tea from a box in the cupboard. Tea I knew was safe. When Julian returned, I was sitting on the couch pretending to sip from the cup. He watched me drink, his expression satisfied. Within 30 minutes, I pretended to grow drowsy, yawning and stretching. I think I'll go to bed early, I murmured, making my voice heavy. Suddenly so tired. That's good, baby. You need rest. Julian helped me to the bedroom, tucked me in with tender care. Then he kissed my forehead and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I lay there in the dark, my eyes wide open, listening to his footsteps move away down the hall. I heard his office door close. And then, after about 10 minutes, I heard his voice, muffled but audible. I wanted to creep closer, to press my ear against the door and hear what he was saying. But I stayed in bed, forcing myself to remain still. The recording device would catch everything. All I had to do was wait and play the innocent, grief-stricken wife. The next day, while Julian was at work, I retrieved the recording device from his car using the remote access Marcus had shown me. Then I met Marcus at a coffee shop in Queens, somewhere we definitely wouldn't run into anyone from my social circle. Marcus loaded the audio files onto his laptop, and we sat in his car listening to hours of mundane conversations. Business calls about construction permits and investor meetings. More business calls about stock options and market trends. I was starting to think we'd gotten nothing useful when we finally hit something different. Julian's voice, but more relaxed, more intimate than I'd ever heard it. "Bella, amor mio, I miss you. This charade is exhausting." A woman's voice, sultry and impatient. "When will the little mouse finally die, Jules? I'm tired of waiting, tired of pretending you're playing the devoted husband." My hands clenched into fists. Marcus reached over and squeezed my shoulder, his expression grim. Julian laughed. "Patience, my love. The dosage has to be carefully calibrated. Too much, and it's suspicious. Too little, and it won't work. But I've increased the amount in her tea. Another few weeks, and her heart will simply stop beating. The doctors will call it broken heart syndrome. Very poetic, don't you think? The grief-stricken daughter dies of a broken heart, just like in a Victorian novel. No one will suspect a thing. And then the entire Vance fortune will be ours?" Isabella's voice was eager, greedy. "Every last penny. I've already prepared the documentation. As her widower, I'll inherit her personal estate, and with my position as CEO and the restructuring I've done at the company, I effectively control Vance Enterprises. 6 years, Isabella. 6 years of planning, of playing the perfect boyfriend and perfect husband. 6 years of pretending to love that naive, pathetic girl. But it will all be worth it when we watch the Vance Empire become the Croft Empire." "The Rossi Croft Empire," Isabella corrected sharply. "Don't forget whose idea this was. Don't forget that it's my family Harrison Vance destroyed. My father who died in prison because of his self-righteous investigation. I would never forget, amore. This has always been about avenging your father. The money is just a bonus." There was a pause, and then Julian's voice became darker, more serious. "Though I admit, I enjoyed the old man's death more than I expected. Watching his car go over that cliff was quite satisfying. The mechanic did excellent work for the price we paid him." I heard Isabella laugh. "You should have seen your face at the funeral. The perfect concerned son-in-law. I almost believed you yourself. I'm very good at what I do, Kara. Why do you think I've gotten this far?" The recording continued for another few minutes, with more intimate conversation, more discussion of their plans. By the time it ended, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the coffee cup Marcus had gotten me. "They killed my parents," I whispered. "They murdered them in cold blood, and Julian married me just to get close enough to kill me too." "Yes," Marcus said quietly, "and if you'd kept drinking that tea, you'd be dead in a matter of weeks. But now we have proof, Ellie. We have enough to go to the police." "No." The word came out fierce, stronger than I felt. "If we go to the police now, Julian will lawyer up. He'll destroy evidence. He's been planning this for 6 years, Marcus. He'll have contingencies. We need more. We need him to incriminate himself completely. We need Isabella, too." Marcus looked at me with something like respect. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that they want me weak, grieving, dependent. I'm thinking that's exactly what I'll give them. Julian expects me to die soon, so I'll play dying. I'll make him confident, make him sloppy, and when he's confident enough, when he thinks he's won, we'll strike. That's dangerous, Miss Vance. If Julian suspects for even a moment that you're onto him, he won't, because I'm going to give the performance of my life." I looked at Marcus, and I knew my eyes were hard, determined. They took my parents from me. They were going to take my life. I'm going to make sure they pay for every single moment of pain they've caused. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the perfect victim. I stopped dumping the tea down the sink. Instead, I poured it into a sealed container I kept hidden, and I replaced it with regular tea. But I pretended to drink Julian's version, and I pretended to grow weaker. I stumbled. I complained of dizziness, of chest pains. I let Julian drive me to the doctor, where I described symptoms of cardiac stress. The doctor, concerned, ordered tests. She's been under tremendous emotional strain, Julian told the doctor with perfect concern. Losing both parents so suddenly, the grief has been overwhelming for her. The doctor nodded sympathetically and prescribed rest, therapy, and careful monitoring. Julian collected the prescriptions with a satisfied smile I pretended not to see. At home, I became more dependent on Julian. I asked for his help with simple tasks. I let him control my schedule, my appointments, my medications. I withdrew from the few friends I still had contact with, claiming I needed solitude to grieve. I stopped asking about the company, stopped questioning his business decisions. You're finally accepting what needs to happen, Julian told me one night, stroking my hair as we lay in bed. You're finally letting go of the burden of responsibility. That's good, Ellie. That's healthy. I wanted to recoil from his touch. I wanted to scream the truth in his face. But I smiled weakly and told him I was grateful for his care. Meanwhile, Marcus was working behind the scenes. He'd found the mechanic and secured his testimony with witness protection. He'd traced the offshore accounts and discovered a complex web of shell companies, all ultimately controlled by Julian and Isabella. He'd found communications between them dating back 6 years, proving their relationship preceded my father's hiring of Julian. We have enough for criminal prosecution, Marcus told me at one of our secret meetings. Murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, they'll both go to prison for life. I want to confront them first, I said. I want them to know that I know. I want to see their faces when their perfect plan falls apart. Ellie, that's dangerous, I know. But I need this, Marcus. I need them to understand that they underestimated me. That the naive, pathetic girl they thought would be easy to manipulate and murder was stronger than they ever imagined. Marcus studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Tell me your plan. We spent 3 days preparing. Marcus coordinated with the NYPD, specifically with a detective named Sarah Chen who specialized in white-collar crime and had worked with my father in the past. Detective Chen reviewed all our evidence and agreed to be present for the confrontation, along with several other officers. I called an emergency board meeting at Vance Enterprises, citing concerns about company direction that I needed to address with Julian and the board. Julian seemed pleased, thinking I was finally taking an interest in business again, probably planning to use my weakened state to manipulate the meeting in his favor. What he didn't know was that the board members who would be present weren't the people he'd installed. Marcus had contacted the legitimate board members, the ones Julian had pushed out, and brought them back. And I'd invited one additional person, Isabella Rossi. Supposedly as a financial consultant, I wanted to hear from about company restructuring. The meeting was set for 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. The Vance Enterprises boardroom was on the 43rd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan. It was designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind everyone of the Vance power and legacy. Julian arrived early, as he always did, dressed in an impeccable navy suit. He found me already in the boardroom, looking pale and fragile in a black Chanel dress. He crossed the room to kiss my cheek. "Are you sure you're up to this?" he asked with perfect concern. "We can postpone if you're not feeling well." "No, I need to do this." I let my voice tremble slightly. "I need to finally step up and honor my father's legacy. I can't keep hiding from responsibility." Julian's smile was satisfied. He thought he'd won. He thought I was about to hand him complete control, thinking it was my own idea. Isabella arrived 10 minutes later, stunning in a red dress that screamed confidence. She shook Julian's hand with professional courtesy, but I saw the brief flash of intimacy in their eyes, the connection they thought no one else would notice. Then Marcus entered with Detective Chen and 3 other officers. Julian's expression immediately shifted to confusion. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Why are the police here?" "Please, everyone sit down," I said, my voice suddenly stronger than it had been in weeks. "There's something we all need to discuss." Julian looked at me sharply, really looked at me, and I saw the moment he realized I wasn't as weak as I'd seemed. His eyes narrowed. "Ellie, what is this?" "This is the end of your plan, Julian, or should I say, the end of your and Isabella's plan." I turned to face them both. "You wanted a board meeting? Well, you're getting one. But instead of discussing company restructuring, we're going to discuss your conspiracy to murder my parents, your ongoing attempt to murder me, and your systematic theft from Vance Enterprises." The room went silent. Isabella's face went white, then red. Julian's expression shifted through shock, anger, and then settled into cold calculation. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said smoothly. Detective, my wife has been under tremendous emotional stress. She's not well. This is clearly some kind of breakdown. Actually, Mr. Croft, we have recordings of you and Miss Rossi discussing in detail how you sabotaged Mr. and Mrs. Vance's vehicle, how you've been slowly poisoning Mrs. Croft, and how you plan to steal the Vance fortune. Detective Chen's voice was professional but firm. We also have testimony from the mechanic you paid to create the brake failure, financial records of your embezzlement, and communications between you and Miss Rossi dating back 6 years. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small remote. Would you like to hear your own words? I pressed play. The recording filled the room. Julian's voice, casual and cruel. Another few weeks, and her heart will simply stop beating. The doctors will call it broken heart syndrome. Isabella's laughter. Their discussion of my father's murder. As the recording played, I watched Julian's mask finally crack. The charming, loving husband disappeared, replaced by something cold and vicious. He lunged toward me, but Marcus was faster, stepping between us and catching Julian by the arm. Don't even think about it, Marcus growled. Julian struggled for a moment, then stopped, his chest heaving. You stupid bitch, he snarled at me. You actually figured it out. I knew you were smarter than you acted, but I didn't think you had the spine to do anything about it. You murdered my parents. My voice was steady despite the tears streaming down my face. You pretended to love me. You married me. You were going to kill me. For money. For revenge. For a plan that wasn't even yours. I turned to Isabella. How did it feel, Isabella? Spending 6 years orchestrating this elaborate revenge for your criminal father? Was it worth it? Isabella, surprisingly, smiled. A bitter, hateful smile. Harrison Vance destroyed my family. He took everything from us, ruined my father's reputation, put him in a cage where he died alone. Your father deserved what he got. And so did you. You spoiled princess who never worked for anything in her life. My father exposed a criminal, I said quietly. He did what was right. And you responded by becoming worse than he ever was. You're a murderer, Isabella. You and Julian both. The police moved in then, pulling out handcuffs. Julian fought against them briefly, still trying to reach me, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Ellie. I'll get the best lawyers. I'll fight this. You haven't won yet. I walked closer to him, close enough that the officers tensed, ready to protect me if needed. I looked Julian directly in the eyes and said very quietly, The game is over, Julian, and you lost. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, and every day you're there, you'll remember that the naive, pathetic girl you underestimated destroyed you. They led him away, still shouting threats and curses. Isabella went more quietly, her face a mask of cold hatred. When they were gone, when it was just me, Marcus, Chloe, who had been waiting outside, and the legitimate board members, I finally allowed myself to collapse into a chair. It's over, Chloe said, rushing to my side and pulling me into a hug. It's really over. It's over, I agreed, holding on to her tightly. The trial was a media sensation. The murder of Harrison Vance and his wife, the attempted murder of their daughter by her own husband in an elaborate revenge plot, it had everything the press loved. Julian and Isabella both tried to turn on each other, each claiming the other was the mastermind. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial trails, the mechanic's testimony, the slowly accumulated poison they'd been giving me, it all painted a damning picture. They were both convicted on multiple counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Julian received 3 consecutive life sentences, without possibility of parole. Isabella received the same. They would both die in prison. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, making sure they saw me. I wanted them to see that I'd survived, that I'd won. On the day of sentencing, when Julian was led away in shackles, he looked at me one last time. There was no love in those gray-blue eyes anymore, if there ever had been. Just hatred and the bitter recognition of defeat. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. 2 years of my life had been built on lies. The man I'd loved had never existed. My parents were still dead. No amount of justice could bring them back. But slowly, I began to rebuild. I took over Vance Enterprises officially, and with the help of the original board members and Marcus's guidance, I cleaned house. Every person Julian had installed was thoroughly vetted, and, if they had any connection to his schemes, removed. I brought in new leadership, people who believed in sustainable, ethical business practices. I restructured the company's focus. The skyscraper my father had dreamed of was completed, but I modified the final design. Instead of purely luxury condos for the wealthy, I incorporated affordable housing units, a community center, and a public green space. I named the building Harrison and Margaret Vance Center, a memorial to my parents that actually served the community, rather than just standing as a monument to wealth. Chloe and I rebuilt our friendship, stronger than before. She helped me through the darkest days after the trial, when the reality of everything that had happened would hit me in waves. She was there when I finally cleared out Julian's belongings from our apartment, when I moved to a new place that held no memories of him. Marcus became a permanent part of my life, heading up security for both me personally and for Vance Enterprises. He'd saved my life, and I trusted him completely. 3 years after Julian and Isabella were convicted, I stood on the observation deck of the Vance Center. The building was nearly complete, and from this height, I could see all of Manhattan spread out before me. The city my father had helped build, the city I was now shaping in my own way. I thought about the naive girl who'd believed in fairy tale romances and perfect strangers who swept you off your feet. I thought about how much I'd changed, how much I'd learned about trust, about strength, about the importance of listening to that inner voice that says something is wrong. I'd survived an elaborate murder plot. I'd faced down my would-be killer and won. But more than that, I'd learned that I was capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined. I didn't need someone to save me or protect me or make decisions for me. I could do all of that myself. The sun was setting over the Hudson, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. And for the first time since my parents' death, I felt something like hope for the future. I pulled out my phone and looked at a text from a man I'd recently met, Daniel, an architect who'd worked on one of our community projects. He'd asked me to dinner, nothing fancy, just coffee actually. A low-key first date with no pressure. I'd been hesitant to trust anyone romantically again. How could I, after Julian? But I was slowly learning that not every person who showed interest was hiding a sinister agenda. Some people were just people, with their own flaws and goodness, trying to make a connection. I wasn't ready yet, but maybe someday I would be. I texted back, "Not yet, but thank you for asking. Maybe when I'm more ready." His response was immediate. "No problem. The offer stands whenever you're interested. No pressure." I smiled. No manipulation, no pushing, just acceptance. Maybe there were still good people in the world after all. As I stood there watching the sunset, I made a promise to myself. I would never again ignore warning signs for the sake of love or acceptance. I would never again let anyone make me feel like I needed to be less than I was. I would trust my instincts, protect my boundaries, and build a life based on my own values and dreams. The Vance legacy wasn't just about buildings and wealth anymore. It was about resilience, about rising from ashes, about refusing to be a victim. My parents hadn't died in vain. Their deaths had taught me the most painful lesson of my life, but it had also made me stronger than I ever knew I could be. Julian and Isabella had tried to destroy me. Instead, they'd forged me into someone unbreakable. And that was the greatest revenge of all. Trust yourself. Your instincts are powerful. That uneasy feeling you keep pushing down? Listen to it. Have you ever ignored warning signs in a relationship only to regret it later? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else recognize the red flags before it's too late. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is survive and tell your truth.